No Canadian Prime Minister had ever done this before. In a world where diplomacy is carefully scripted and every word is weighed like gold, Mark Carney broke the unwritten rules. In front of cameras, foreign delegates, and a stunned U.S. ambassador, he delivered one of the most forceful defenses of Canadian sovereignty the world had ever seen. What was supposed to be just another conference about energy security suddenly spiraled into a moment that shook the foundations of Canada-U.S. relations. Carney didn't just respond to the American ambassador's challenge, he silenced him. His words cut through decades of quiet diplomacy and left the room in stunned silence. And the impact didn't stop there. Within hours, the clash went viral, trending across social media, sparking heated debates in Washington and triggering a wave of national pride in Canada. But behind that fiery exchange was something deeper. Months of secret planning, quiet frustration, and a deliberate strategy that could redefine the future of the Arctic. This wasn't just a heated argument. It was a turning point. A moment where Canada drew a line in the ice and told the United States and the world that its sovereignty was non-negotiable. But what exactly happened in that tense 7-minute showdown? What did the U.S. ambassador say that pushed Carney to break all protocol? And why do experts believe this was more than an emotional outburst? It was part of a much larger game plan. Stay with me, because once you hear how this unfolded, you'll see why some are calling this the boldest move by a Canadian leader in modern history. At first glance, the North American Energy Security Conference in Ottawa looked like just another polished diplomatic event. It was being held at the historic Royal York Hotel, a venue that has seen countless handshakes, staged smiles, and carefully scripted speeches over the decades. For most people in the room, this was supposed to be routine. A panel about Arctic energy resources, environmental responsibility, and cooperation between allies. Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped onto the stage with his usual calm presence. He began by laying out Canada's vision for the Arctic: sustainable development of energy resources, strict respect for the fragile environment, and above all, honoring the rights of Indigenous communities who have lived on these lands for centuries. His tone was steady, professional, the kind of speech that reassures both investors and environmentalists at the same time. Cameras clicked, delegates nodded politely, and everything seemed to follow the expected script of diplomacy. But under the surface, tension had been brewing for months. The Arctic wasn't just about protecting the environment or building partnerships, it was about power. Melting ice was opening up shipping lanes that could transform global trade. Vast reserves of oil, gas, and rare minerals lay beneath the ice. Whoever controlled these waters and resources would gain not only wealth, but influence on a global scale. For Canada, the Northwest Passage was more than just a shipping route. It was a matter of sovereignty. For the United States, however, it was a gateway they believed should remain international, free for all nations to access. Until now, both sides had carefully avoided making this disagreement public. That delicate silence was about to be shattered. Because when it came time for the American ambassador to speak, the mood in the room shifted. Delegates leaned in, journalists prepared their pens, and cameras zoomed closer. No one knew it yet, but the stage was set for one of the most explosive confrontations in Canadian diplomatic history. When Ambassador William Pearson finally took the microphone, his opening words sounded safe enough. He smiled politely, praised Carney's visionary approach, and thanked Canada for its leadership in the Arctic. For a few moments, it seemed like the panel would continue in the usual rhythm of formal, empty compliments. But then, the atmosphere shifted. His next words were like a cold wind cutting through the room. However, Pearson began, his voice steady, "We cannot ignore the fact that the Northwest Passage constitutes international waters." The room froze. Delegates glanced at each other. Journalists immediately raised their pens. Everyone knew what those words meant. For decades, Washington had quietly insisted on this position, but never in such a blunt public way, with cameras rolling. Pearson didn't stop there. He continued, "We cannot allow sovereignty claims over these waters to hinder the fair sharing of energy resources in the region." The impact was immediate. This wasn't simply a legal statement, it was a direct challenge to Canada's authority, voiced openly in its own capital city. For Canada, the Northwest Passage wasn't a hypothetical debate. It was an artery of national identity, tied to history, geography, and sovereignty. Generations of Canadians had considered these icy waters part of their own territory. But now, in front of hundreds of international delegates, the U.S. ambassador had essentially said, "Canada doesn't own them." And if that wasn't bold enough, Pearson escalated further. "In the coming decade," he declared, "we must establish a new international regime for the safe and fair use of energy resources in the Arctic region." Translation? Washington wanted rules that would dilute Canada's control, rules that would open the door for other powers to stake their claims. As Pearson spoke, cameras zoomed in on Carney's face. His normally calm expression had hardened. Jaw tight, eyes sharp, he sat motionless, but the tension in his posture was visible to everyone in the room. The stage was set for a response that would go far beyond ordinary diplomacy. Because Carney wasn't about to let this slide. The silence in the room felt heavy. Cameras captured every detail. The clenched jaw, the sharpened stare. When Carney finally spoke, his voice carried a tension that immediately cut through the air. "Mr. Ambassador," he began slowly, "what you describe as a new international regime is nothing more than a denial of 150 years of Canadian sovereignty." Gasps rippled across the hall. Diplomats rarely speak in absolutes. Yet Carney had just drawn a line in the ice, one that no one could ignore. He leaned forward, his voice rising in strength. "The Northwest Passage is Canadian internal waters. This is not a topic open for discussion. Just as the United States does not open the status of the Florida Strait for debate, we will not open the status of our waters for debate." That comparison landed like a hammer. Every American in the room knew exactly what Carney meant. If the U.S. wouldn't let anyone question its control over Florida, Canada wouldn't let anyone question its control over the Arctic. Ambassador Pearson tried to diffuse the tension with a diplomatic smile, saying, "Mr. Prime Minister, we have different views within the framework of international law. This is normal." But Carney didn't let him off the hook. He cut him off mid-sentence, something almost unheard of in diplomatic circles. "No, Mr. Ambassador, this is not normal. This is not about different views. This is about directly challenging a country's sovereignty." His voice was firm, his words measured, but the passion was unmistakable. The room held its breath. The moderator attempted to step in, but Carney wasn't finished. He raised the stakes even further. If the United States cannot understand the importance of respecting Canada's sovereignty, perhaps we need to reconsider how the longest peaceful border in the Northern Hemisphere is maintained. It was a shot across the bow. For over a century, the Canada-US border had been a symbol of peace, with minimal military presence. Carney was openly suggesting that this could change. The ambassador was speechless. Delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Cameras kept rolling. Carney had said what no Canadian leader before him had dared to say. And then he stood up. Before the panel had officially ended, he placed the microphone down and walked out. The message was clear. Canada's sovereignty was not up for debate. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Hundreds of delegates sat frozen, processing what they had just witnessed. The American ambassador was left sitting alone, stunned, and visibly rattled. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation began flooding social media. Hashtags like hashtag Carney stands and hashtag Canada Strong trended worldwide. Supporters praised Carney for finally saying what so many Canadians had wanted to hear. Finally, a leader who stands up to the U.S., one viral post read. Back in Ottawa, the reaction was immediate. Polls showed nearly 80% of Canadians supported Carney's defiant stance. Editorials called it a historic moment of national pride. For ordinary Canadians, Carney's words resonated as proof that their country would no longer bow quietly to American pressure. But while the public celebrated, Washington scrambled. Behind the cameras, diplomats knew that Carney's outburst wasn't just dramatic, it was dangerous. Because once sovereignty is questioned on the world stage, the consequences don't fade easily. Officially, both sides tried to downplay the confrontation. The White House released a cautious statement. "We value our friendship with Canada and are committed to resolving all issues through diplomatic channels." But, unofficially, the phones were burning. Within 24 hours, a private call took place between Carney and the U.S. president. Insiders described it as cold but constructive, with neither side backing down. Washington wanted calm, Ottawa wanted respect. The gap between the two was obvious. And here's the twist. Carney's response wasn't a spontaneous eruption of anger. According to sources in Ottawa, his cabinet had been quietly debating for months whether to confront the U.S. over the Arctic. Carney didn't just lose his cool, he executed a carefully timed strategy. Former diplomats later revealed that Carney's words had been sharpened in advance, designed to make headlines and force Washington into a corner. In other words, what looked like a fiery outburst was actually a chess move in a much larger game. And it worked. Overnight, the Arctic, once a quiet, technical issue, was on the front page of newspapers worldwide. The Arctic isn't just a frozen wilderness. It's fast becoming one of the most contested regions on Earth. As climate change melts the ice, new shipping routes are opening that could cut weeks off global trade journeys. Beneath the ice lie vast reserves of oil, gas, and rare minerals, resources worth trillions. Canada and the U.S. aren't the only players. Russia has already deployed icebreakers and military bases to stake its claim. China calls itself a near-Arctic state and has poured money into polar research and infrastructure. The European Union has also shown growing interest. By taking such a bold stand, Carney didn't just challenge Washington. He sent a signal to Moscow, Beijing, and Brussels. Canada will not step aside. International relations experts warned that the Arctic is fast becoming the new geopolitical battlefield. And Carney's words may have just drawn the first hard line in that battle. If anyone thought Carney's stance was just tough talk, they were proven wrong within a week. Carney announced a massive $15 billion Arctic security and infrastructure package, the largest investment in the region in Canadian history. The package included new icebreaker ships to patrol northern waters, advanced surveillance systems to monitor foreign activity, and new military facilities built directly in Inuit communities. This wasn't just rhetoric anymore. Canada was putting its money where its mouth was. In his first speech after the announcement, Carney doubled down, "Diplomacy is built on mutual respect. Canada will not allow any country, even our closest ally, to challenge our sovereignty." The message was crystal clear. Canada was done playing quiet diplomacy. It was now prepared to defend its interests openly, even if it meant clashing with Washington. The Arctic had officially become the newest front in global power politics. And thanks to one fiery confrontation, the world now knew that Canada was ready to fight for its place at the table. What happened in that Ottawa conference room wasn't just a diplomatic argument, it was a turning point. For the first time in modern history, a Canadian Prime Minister openly silenced an American ambassador on camera and walked out without hesitation. That single act transformed a quiet territorial dispute into an international headline, forcing Washington and the rest of the world to take notice. But was it the right move? Some experts call Carney's stance reckless, warning that open defiance could push Canada into dangerous waters, straining relations with its closest ally. Others argue it was long overdue, that for too long Canada's voice had been overshadowed by U.S. dominance, and this was the moment to prove that Canadian sovereignty is non-negotiable. What's certain is this: the Arctic is no longer a forgotten frontier. With Russia, China, Europe, and the United States all circling, Canada has drawn a hard line in the ice and backed it up with billions in defense spending. The question now isn't just about who controls the Northwest Passage. It's about whether Canada can hold its ground in a world where power politics is shifting rapidly northward. So, what do you think? Was Carney bold or reckless? Did he secure Canada's future, or risk a dangerous confrontation with Washington? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this debate isn't going away anytime soon. And if you want to keep up with the hidden battles shaping Canada's future and the new geopolitical struggles emerging around the world, make sure to hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next.